Hi, David.
Hey, good morning.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. It's a bit hot here, so
Where are you? Where in the world are you?
in Europe, Central Europe.
Central Europe. It is hot there. Yes. There's been a few heat waves
Yeah,
coming and
indeed.
going. I live in
Hi.
San Francisco, where it is permanently chill.
Yeah,
Hey,
yeah.
Yeah, I love
Permanent,
the
perfect.
SF climate.
yeah, you'll be out here, I suppose. But yeah,
Yeah,
Yep.
great.
it's nice. It's not too cold. It's not too warm all
Yeah,
year round.
that's right.
How do you handle the heat, Martin?
I mean, I think we haven't had that much heat so far. I think
You're
today
a
is an
bit closer to.
especially hot day. This weekend is promising to be hot. But we've actually had some pretty like gloomy, rainy days these past couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, summer wasn't good, but I mean, there's still hope of it, but wasn't really good
Martin,
so
where are
far.
you?
I'm in Amsterdam, the
Okay.
Netherlands.
Okay. Yeah, more Central European heat. Um,
Yeah, it's a
I'm
weird summer.
Yeah, I'm going to Greece in early September. So hopefully that will be on the shoulder of um, what's been pretty beastly, I think, in Greece this summer. It's been problematic. But
Yeah. Has it been very hot there?
Greece had a heat wave I mean, everyone's had a heat wave, but in June and July, it's been pretty bad. So
Mm.
um, first time first time I will have been in Greece.
Beautiful country.
That's what I've been told. Yeah,
Good food.
yeah.
Really good food.
Yeah. How long will you be there for?
A week. On an island, Serifos, and I'm curious because I'm a little baffled by, some of these tiny, tiny Greek islands with, beautiful accommodations, but I'm sort of like, I have questions. Like,
Wait, what kind of questions?
where does the electricity come from? Where does the refuse go to? Where do the children go to school? I don't know. The island is so small. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I
Is there
definitely
a
expect for
hospital?
sort of
Like, I don't know.
for further education, they'll probably have to
Yeah.
leave the island, but there's
Yeah.
bound to be an elementary school at least.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, let us know if you find answers to any of those questions.
I will for sure.
Hi there.
Hello. How
Hi.
was
Long
it?
time no see.
Hey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You look rested.
Kind of. I'm home alone this week, so
So
taking care
that's
of
the
it.
reason why you look rested.
Yeah. So it's just like appearance. Underneath that, it's like, being tired and stuff.
Yeah. So Michael should join any minute. I think then we're complete. So I had drafted a beautiful proposal and then I closed VS Code. It was a mistake. It's all gone now. But
Yeah.
I
Hasn't it auto saved it? Like when you reopen it, doesn't it
no,
show up?
I'm using as we do a lot of C sharp. I'm using Rider often, and it has this auto save feature, so I don't really care if I just close it. So if I have an untitled file open, I can just close it, and it's gonna be there when I reopen it. And in VS Code, that's not the case, at least not with the default settings. So,
Not by
Hmm.
default. Yes, by
yeah.
default it doesn't save that. I think that's because of targeting like TypeScript, JavaScript that people type shit and then after they save it explicitly they want to recompile it. But you can change that setting because I did that because it was annoying as hell for me.
Yeah. Yeah, but with TypeScript, it's a bit annoying though, especially when you have relay compiler running and stuff like this, and every time you type, it has to run in the background. Though it's really efficient now with the new one. But, so let me check the agenda. fine.
Yeah, David. So today is a regular meeting as opposed to like last week's monthly meeting. Because looking back, I think it might have been a little overwhelming, like as your first meeting, because there was a lot of stuff assumed because we were basically like
It's
recapping
fine.
discussions
It's
previous
fine.
weeks.
It's okay. But thank you for saying that.
Yeah, so please like let us know if there's anything you want more background on or anything that
Thank
comes
you.
to
That's
mind.
very gracious.
This one is still I think I need to reread the graphical spec before I start writing more of this spec, just to get, you know, the kind of language again on the stack,
Yeah.
because it's different.
Yes, I'm guessing field selection syntax is probably the only topic on the agenda right
Yeah,
now,
I have
or
two. I have two. So I have a few changes again. It's not polished, but I have a few changes to the selection set syntax, the stuff that we discussed the last time with the angle brackets.
Yeah.
A few things.
The square brackets, you mean the one that Benji, yeah.
Yeah, I like the syntax. Some things I discovered on the way, which are quite interesting. It's just happened to be when you write spec, you find a few things out. There's Michael. And then I have another topic to just quickly talk about. It goes into the same direction as you did with the I can't remember, variables or directives or something like this, so that we just talk about extensibility quickly. It doesn't have to be V1, but it's about nullability and null enforcement, because I think the last 5 or 10 minutes of the main work group, we talked a bit about it. And I think that we do not have to have it in, but we should define the default behavior, which then leads to an extensibility point at some point. But let's start first. I think we're complete. So Michael, if you want to do the introduction.
Yeah, 1 second. Okay. Sorry, I had a board meeting and lots to discuss. Okay. Hi, everyone. Great that you're all back again. By attending this meeting, we are all in agreement and are abiding to the GraphQL spec membership agreement and to the GraphQL code of conduct. Let's start with a quick round of introduction. And my name is Michael. I'm the host today. And pass on from here.
Real quick, my name's David Van Amelia. I am with Hasura. And I'm new-ish.
I'm Martin with Apollo.
I'm
Not sure
Pascal Killigrim.
I'm Camille from the guild.
Eric from Apollo.
And Shane is just
Hey.
going to listen.
Yeah, I'm here listening in today. Shane from Apollo.
Good. I think the podcast is not yet merged, but will be merged soon. So I've added 2 topics to the agenda today. First thing is the last thing that we discussed in the main working group. Let me share the screen quickly. This one. Do you see something?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So we had in the very last bit of the last main working group, we were talking about lists a bit. And I already did a few changes. And this is the second time I write this. The first time I lost all my changes anyway. And what we did discover is that we need some way of indicating that we want to map a list. And the idea is that instead of just using the angle brackets, we use the curly brackets, we use square brackets to indicate that there is a list. And what you can do is basically the same thing than what you would do with the normal path syntax. So you can also scope it, and then you can define an object scoped to this path inside of this of these square brackets. So this is just the example section, which now also has the right title. And when we scroll down, I've added a bit more stuff to the selected object value section. So what I did was I moved all the path stuff, which was in the selected value section, down to the selected object value. This could still change, but basically what I write here, or what's written here, is that you can use also so a selected object value following a path is scoped to the type of the field selected by the path. This means that all of the values inside of this path are scoped to the type of the returning field.
And this example is still missing the square brackets, right? They should be there.
This is not listed. I just showed you how to do it, because how to do it with selected object values, because the selected list values are slightly different. So this is
but this one does have dimensions, I think. So it's
yes, but it's
The
just
same arguments, yeah, but
yeah, sure. I think it's just the naming of the field. I think that's confusing. Should be singular.
Yeah, I mean, if you have the whatever, probably we should use a different example for lists. I agree.
Hey, so
No, but I think we were using dimension versus dimensions, I think, in other examples, right? Like dimension was the singular.
Yes.
Yes, correct. So question though, so like over here when you're doing dimension, right, on the object, you have a dot and then you get a those brackets. When you're having examples around the list, the dot is excluded. I think that probably is confusing. At least
but it's the same, but it's the same like in most languages, like when you have an array of something, it's directly on the field name, or
I mean, you usually do not have something like a path and then the object constructor syntax or something like this in programming languages. I agree that this would look weird, kind of, because so that the dot was just in the path syntax because it's a path. We can discuss to add it also in the list syntax.
I think in GraphQL, like paths, like arrays do not introduce separate elements in the path. So there's some precedence there, I think. Like the dot is for separating the field names.
Yeah, that's right.
like if you look at the path syntax that we use in GraphQL, it's directly attached to the field name.
Yeah. Exactly. So this section hasn't changed much, but what has changed is that we also now have a selected list value. And what I discovered on the way is that if you have a selected list value, you have basically adjust the selected value. This can be anything. So it could be a field, it could be an object, it could be multiple possible fields with types. But what's quite important is that this list can only have one element, because more than one element doesn't make sense. Right?
It could have one path element, but it could map over a list with multiple elements.
Exactly. Yeah. But the definition is limited to just one, because if you have multiple, then you will see it doesn't make any sense at all. Good. No. So it is basically just a bit of text to describe this, and then the example where you have part IDs, where you pass in the part IDs. The example could definitely be better. And what you basically map is, you see you have a list of IDs, and what you map into it is the IDs of the parts, like this. This is just a singular selection. Now, if we go to the
I think Pascal, the lookup is confusing there. I would
Yep.
just remove the lookup
Yeah,
because
that's
you
right.
use requires.
It's wrong anyway, so it shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
And then we have the counterexample. You see, as soon as you include more than one field, it doesn't make sense anymore. Because what does this mean?
You need an object constructor there.
Exactly. And this is,
Yeah.
you can pass in a selected object value inside of this. And then basically the same rule applies. Actually, I need to have a note here, because we have to mention the scope. Because we need to, basically, this is scope to the parts outside. In case the input type is a nested list, so the shape of the input must match the shape of the output type. Meaning, if you have this, then you basically also have to wrap it twice. This allows you actually to do more flexible things. Even you can even map
nested list.
a list. Yeah, but you can map nested to non-nested structure. I mean, to nested structure, but not to nested arrays. That would be possible too, theoretically.
Yeah, we're not flattening the list, right? There's no implicit flattening. You have to map it to a nested list.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can see that also in the type. If you look at the type, it's also a nested list. Like there's nested part to nested part input.
Yeah, we don't.
And we can always introduce like a flatten operator later if that.
Yeah, most likely.
Up.
Yeah, I just think that with this we're the most flexible to extend, because the more explicit we are, the easier it is to.
No, definitely. Yeah.
Again, look up.
And
there also.
Yep, I'm there. 1 second. Look. Which doesn't work. No. There. Yeah, this is gone too. Good. And then the example that we had before with the location, where we basically, I mean, what I introduced here is the path syntax, which actually should be up here because we already introduced the path syntax. And then basically we said that this would just be a dot, and we need something more complex here for the path example. So it would be something like this. So basically the scope here, and if you use the list and you prefix it, then you always have the path, the scope. So that shouldn't be down here. It should actually already be up here. So that means that this is already scoped to the part type.
I think I need to reread this to get that last point.
Yeah. I mean, it's not final. I said I had a better version, but it's gone. So I will polish this a bit more, and then I will just commit it if you like agree with it broadly, and then we can have a discussion on GitHub. Is there any questions so far or comments? But what's your feeling about the whole thing, Camille? Because you were not here last few sessions.
Yeah, so I think it's like markdown stuff, right? The double square brackets. It's just to like have one, right?
No, it's because the output type is double. It's a nested. It's a double list.
It's a matrix.
Is it a thing in GraphQL?
You can have 2 levels.
It is. Yep. You can have infinite levels.
Yeah, you can technically have infinite levels. In the spec, we only define 2, but it's not limiting. So.
Oh, I see. Okay. Like my main question is like in the selection path, like need for square brackets. I still don't get it really. Just that like, the output type and the input type, so and they have to match. So if it's a list, it has to match a list, right? So if you like get into
the element. The idea is that if you want to restructure the data. Maybe in this case, we have the case where Pascal is with a good case there. You have a list of part, but you want to produce a list of IDs now. So you can select from the list, I just take ID. And then basically it removes the object and maps it to a scalar list. That's what you can do.
I get that, but if it's like parts.id, then it's kind of the same, no? Like it would mean the same thing, right?
No, there are cases where it's not, it would be not clear how to interpret that. And that's why we introduced the square bracket last week.
The parts.id would not be valid
yeah,
because parts is a list. And we originally discussed sort of object constructor syntax there for lists. And that works when you're constructing an object, but it doesn't work for these scalar cases. And that's why Benji brought up the idea of like separating object construction and list mapping.
And there were ambiguous cases, right? When you want to do this case, actually, the parts ID, and it would not be clear if you want to construct an object with just an ID inside it, or if you want to flatten it to an ID list. This case specifically, it would not be clear. Yeah.
But then if you have a list of IDs and then you like select the part.id, then you know that it needs to become a list, no? So you like plug the ID from whatever list is, you know, at the top level, or like the, you know, at the parent level. So I don't know. I still don't get it. Like, for example, the part is a list, right? And then it has like, I don't know, scalars or an object, right? So then if it has an object or with ID field and the parent is a list, and then we have like parents.id, it will naturally fit into the array of IDs. So I like, for example, from the parser perspective and like gateway perspective, whatever, like it will have to match anyway, right? Like, so I still don't get it.
I think it's more about the completeness of the syntax, because the ambiguous cases that we discussed, if I remember correctly, is when you start using pipes, then you run into issues because you cannot. You cannot,
yes.
In the syntax, you cannot have input unions, right? So here you can basically say, I want to scope this to parts, and then in here I can still have different cases.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, it also allows us to later grow the syntax better, because now we have very specifically outlined what the list is. And if we, for instance, want to introduce something like flatten a list or something, it gives us more space because we didn't overuse like the dot or the.
Yeah, I think one thing which it adds is you map the structure exactly how it is in the input and the output type. And just in case we go the next topic, we go into nullability, for example, it would be really valuable to have this, because then you can mark certain things in the list as required or not.
And also differentiate between like the list being null or the element being null.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah.
Then you need actually even the nested structures, because it could be in a matrix that you whatever you want to do with it, right? I would say
explicit is actually also being explicit also makes it easier for the future, right? If we want to simplify it in the future, make some shortcomings, sure, but starting with being explicit is better than, because you can simplify it. Otherwise, you cannot do it, right, without breaking changes.
Yeah, we buy us some space for the future, essentially, with the explicitness.
Yeah, I would say so too. Any other mentions, questions, comments? Okay, so I will commit this.
Just to make sure I understood the example, I can't really see this screen as well, so just sorry if this was covered, but I put in the chat an example, you can do a nested, so list, object, lists, like that could keep happening recursively. I put it in the chat, right? Like that's a valid example.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. It produces a list of an object that has a field bar, which is a list of IDs.
Yeah. Yeah. So at the end of I'm really interested in the list of IDs that are down a bunch of paths.
I'm not sure if this is valid because it's not named.
Well, it depends on what you're doing with it, right? If you assign it to like a list of IDs, it should work.
Yeah, but you need the name, right? So meaning I'll put the example here quickly. I will post it later in the chat chain. So if you think about this would have to be something, it would have to have an alias. You have to specify the field name because this technically is a path, and we said that
you're right, for the object that you're constructing.
But you can basically theoretically do something like this.
Yeah, and then it would be just a list of IDs. It wouldn't be a list of objects that have a field that's the ID. Yeah.
Oh yeah, so the second one is like the two-dimensional ID list, right?
Yeah, so basically what you do is you go into I think in this example, exactly in this example, at some point, oh, I didn't want to do that. Where is it? In this example, something like this would be really nice, because then you can basically say you want to map, for example, you have an address, a list of address, and then in the address you have a list of, I don't know, cities, and now you can have a city's IDs input type, and basically go into the address and get all the cities out of it.
Yeah, I think we want the syntax on, like within the syntax, like it would, because you want to specify at what level the flattening applies, but that's a detail.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. Then we talk about new characters in graphical.
Yeah, but let's not widen the scope. Let's leave flattening for the next iteration.
I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember, and I'm definitely not old enough to remember, but I came across it, like APL, the like array processing language. Oh. It's one of those languages where if you know what you're doing, you can be really expressive, but there's like a bunch of different symbols and different semantics that like they fit together, but it's this really terse syntax. I kind of feel we're moving towards that. But it might also be interesting to look at as a source of inspiration, even.
Yeah.
I'll see if I can find some examples.
Yeah, I think JSON Path has tons of those different operations also, right? So the syntax as it is right now, it is actually very, very similar to the JSON Path, which I think also makes it easier for folks to grasp. But yeah, there's tons of other operations out there as well.
Yeah, but I think we should have a limited approach for our iteration 1. So it's also easy to implement. And then later we can add on things as we see demand for it. Because otherwise we create this big monster with all the features, and then just a couple of them I really used.
Yeah. I think this goes a bit into the next thing I put on the agenda, and it's about nullability and what that means for us. And the case is basically if you have an abstract type, and let's say, or the case which we discussed quickly last time, is when you have something like this, and you have a product by ID, or I don't know, call it. What's the abstract thing? Product by ID, which can return a product, and the product is a union of, let's say, movie and book, whatever. And now it's going to be a bit field like this. No. Yeah. So now things get a bit awkward when you or interesting when you have on movie something which is nullable with an object type. So let's put author here. The example will not make sense, so don't worry. And we don't have this on book. So what you could do now is you could basically say that we have a movie. And if you have a movie, you want to have an author, and then we want to have the ID of the author, right? But you could also say that we have a product or a book, and we just have the ID. So the question is a bit, what does this mean now, right? Because this can be nullable. So what should we do if this is in fact null? If this input is nullable?
I think this doesn't have anything really to do with the union selection, because the type selection first says, I want to use this selector. So then like you move into, and we're going to use this selector regardless, once you have that type selection. And then from there, it could have been just movie.id. It doesn't need to be nested even. If ID is null, then it's just a null field. And so the null field should be passed into the null argument. Right?
Yeah. The problem is more about the selection that you have, right? So it's what match, it's about matching. If you have a union, it's basically you match the first one that matches. But the question is, which is the first one? So let's say you have more than one here, which could be more than one movie example, right? So how do you indicate which one of this should match if this path here is null?
I hadn't even considered the case where you have like multiple type cases with the same type condition. Because that doesn't normally come up.
So nullable
it might come up.
Did come up, right? But it's, in my opinion, anti-pattern. Like some part of the key has to be non-nullable. Because if you have all the keys that are nullable, then that's very, very messy. But yeah, I've seen the part that is a non-nullable part of the key, and there's some additional optional other keys. Yeah.
Yeah, and also like the is at least in theory more generic. Like we're not, what we're doing here is we're basically saying that if you provide this argument, the resulting object will have this value. I think the other direction is something that we should explicitly forbid. Like if there's, or maybe not. Like if the argument is non-nullable, but the object field is nullable, can we sort of guarantee that it's? I mean, I guess the equivalence
is still there.
Guarantees that it's non-nullable, right?
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be on the type. It's just that when you go through, it's like require. When you go through this lookup, it needs to be non-nullable.
And
right?
But on the requires, it could be, right? And requires, you can reference nullable fields, and the keys,
yeah,
it's more of a non-nullable, but it's the same syntax, right? In one case, it's.
I think the requires is actually a way better example when you have something like this, and then let's say you have two nullable fields, like let's say name is a string, and the last name is a string. And then you have the, I don't know, display name or the formatted name, something like this. And now you have an input name, which can be null because these two can be null. And then you have the require here. Is that the right place? Yeah, it is, right? Yeah. And you would do this name or last.
I mean, I can see how this is sort of an extension of the syntax we've discussed, but it's definitely not what I think we had in mind initially. I think the nullability sort of brings this to the forefront because you can have multiple options and one might not match or might not return a result. I think
Yeah,
in the
also
in the type case, we were sort of expecting it to be exhaustive, I think.
exactly, and that's compilable exhaustive, right?
Yeah.
Where this is now something we have to add additional runtime validation to it. And what if yeah, you could do some checks that it will not be null. So for instance, movie ID has to be non-nullable in the case where ID is required or what, but it makes it much more complex if we take nullability into the into the patterns here.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about what would you do in this case?
I think what's also confusing here is that like name is actually nullable, like the argument is nullable. So I would actually expect name to, like, the first name here in the field syntax to always match. Like even if it's null, you would still map it to the argument, because it can contain nulls.
Right. So that makes sense, because that's also what I would kind of propose. Maybe we can even have that somewhere, that by default we only look at the structure and we take the first pattern that matches without any further things to do. That means that if you pass in a movie in here, it will take this one in this case, because you have.
Should not even be an error if you specify both there?
Could be.
Yeah,
this could be could be a validation error even when we analyze the expressions, right?
Yeah, but type conditions could overlap, right? I think that's because they're not, or I mean, we wouldn't limit this to object types, I think. So an abstract types can overlap.
Yeah, abstract types could overlap, but it shouldn't be that in both cases movie is there. I don't know. But it could lead to people having the expectation that this would work, and we are not telling them that it's basically silently discarded.
I wouldn't say we silently discard it. I would just say that we take the first one in the list that matches that works, because then you can theoretically extend it later, right?
But would there be a difference here? Like the ID argument on product by ID, it's nullable right now. So if you make it non-nullable, does that change the semantics? Like, does that mean that like when author ID is null, you go on to the next option?
It's a good question, because this is valid to be null. Author.id can be null.
Yeah.
But if you have an author.id, you can use this product by ID lookup.
I'm tempted to say we should sort of validate this beforehand, and if author ID, well, but I think what's interesting here is that there's actually a difference probably between is and required here.
Why would you say that?
Well, because the direction is different, right? Like what you're saying with the is that if you pass in an ID, you expect author ID to have that value. And since ID is non-nullable, you would expect author ID to be non-nullable. But in the case of require, there's no direct connection between the argument and the direction is.
But that's fine
opposite.
too. The output type can be nullable. That's fine. It's just because you need to have an author ID. You need to have this structure somewhere to even call this lookup.
No, but the validation rule would have to be different, because if it's a require, like if you're requiring an ID, for instance, then and you map it to author ID, and author ID is nullable, then you could get into a situation where the value you're mapping is null, and like the argument doesn't take nulls.
So question.
You mean in this case?
So because if you want to have a more strict spec and then relax it, so like the lookups, right, and those are going to be tying into the keys, right? Do we want to have a rule saying that the keys have to be non-nullable, or that at least parts of the keys has to be non-nullable? So you remove this ambiguity, because otherwise, if you allow the nullable keys, that's kind of like
I think the problem there is that there's no direct connection between the lookup and the key. It's and what I think we discussed this like a couple of months.
That's what I was saying, to move the is into the lookup, so then the lookup matches the keys, right? So then you have the one-to-one mapping between the lookup and the key. But
yeah, I mean, the thing is that you could theoretically do this here as well. I mean, we have seen this a couple of times. If you find a flaw with just scalars, you definitely find one as soon as you do this.
Yeah.
Right. So if we just say that you have to define at least one nullable case, you can basically just say we have both, or non-nullable, we have a fixed ID on both sides, and then we have some non-nullable thing here. And then you have the ambiguity again, right? Which one do you choose if you have both? You can just choose right?
I'm really worried about bringing in nullability with the choice syntax, because it basically like forces us to do like pattern matching, but then we have these complex cases where you have like nested objects and lists, and then like the object you're constructing itself is not null, but like one of its fields might be null, or one of the fields like deeply nested might be null. So now we have to do null propagation.
Yeah, also you have to think about like this syntax is also telling us about semantics that you lose suddenly in these cases.
Well, the
like what
would still be the same, right? Semantic would you can still express semantic equivalence between these things. You just specify that it has to be there to be a valid semantic equivalence. But anyway,
yes, but it is messing it up and is bringing a lot of decisions into the runtime, and that I would avoid. We can always go into that at a later point.
Yeah, that's
if we decide that's
100% agree. I don't want to have it's in. I just want to put it out there so that you know that we can extend it later. Because my point is that if we need it at some point, we can just do this or this, and then we're good. So I think that we can roll with it. The question was more: should we specify in the specification what should happen in these cases, or should we just leave it open for interpretation?
So I think we need a strong validation rule that sort of guarantees at compile time or composition time that we'll get a valid mapping result. Like for instance, here with the formatted name with require, like we have two options. We have name and last name, but what happens if they're both null? We still don't have a valid value there. So I think a better restriction might be to say that we don't allow you to map. Well, we either don't allow you to map like a nullable field, or you have to indicate with like a bang with like an exclamation mark that you're forcing it into non-nullable because you know it'll be non-nullable. That might be another option, but
yeah, I would force one. Like, let's not introduce more syntax at this point.
No, but that might be an option if you still want to leave open the possibility.
Yeah, it's like
the validation will basically be that you're not allowed to map a non-nullable field. So this would be illegal to do. You can, right? Yeah. So that would be, you cannot map.
The selection set can't be ambiguous.
Yeah.
But that's true for require, but not for is. Interestingly enough.
So for the lookups, right? And Camille also had our hand up. So like for the lookup, do we want to say that those have to be non-nullable? Because for the requires, I can see the use case for the nullable ones, but for the lookups, do you want to keep it straight and saying if you do lookups, you have to do non-nullable fields?
I mean, if you want to have parity, then you want to have nullable fields.
Yeah.
because
like
that's
if the argument is nullable, then it's okay, right? There could be a component that is non-nullable of the key, and there could be a component that is an argument that's nullable, which
no, but it's even stronger for the is case, because the mapping works the other way around from requires. So when you have product by ID and ID is non-nullable, you can still map it to a nullable field, because the semantics of is guaranteed that whatever value you input, you get in the output. So when you look up a product by ID, that object by definition has an ID, even if some objects don't have an ID.
the one that you look up has one, exactly.
Yeah.
Kamil, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, like, for example, if we have like string that is non-nullable, I feel like we should require all the values. They have to be non-nullable. Otherwise, it makes no sense for the both, even for the require and for is, I believe.
Why for is?
It's just that, like, if you have, for me, it makes no sense if you have like product by ID and you pass. So for example, there was a discussion about like pattern matching and stuff. Like, we look, what is like non-nullable first and stuff like that. But I don't think it should be the case. Just that, like, the ID you pass, that's the value you get, or the resolver of like the product by ID expect. And it may or may not know what the ID is. It's just that, like, it's a primitive, right? So you just fetch by ID, that's it. So for me, even like using the non-nullable ID, it just mentally, I don't see a logic there. Like, why would you have like product by ID that is null, right?
No, but you wouldn't have product by ID that is null. You would have sort of some products. I mean, ID is a bad example, but let's say you have product by UPC, like a barcode thingy or SKU. Like, some products might not have a UPC, but if you look up a product by its UPC, by definition, the object that's returned has a UPC. I agree with you that the pattern matching is confusing, and I don't think we should do the pattern matching here. But I do think we should allow the fields you're mapping to be nullable in this case.
But if we like, for example, if we like, if the whole point of lookup is actually to find something or like not to find it, right? Like, you pass the ID, it's there or not, right? But if you can pass something that is null to something that expect, like, then you pass something that is null and you get what, like a random product, because like if it has no UPC, then
so you're talking about the argument, whether the argument should be nullable.
Just the argument. Yeah.
I think that's like the issue would be that like a key might have multiple components. And ideally, you'd use like one off or something that sort of guarantees that one of the fields is specified. But there might be cases where like one part of the key might be optional.
Yeah, like, even like if you have like a movie and then there's the author and then there's the ID, right? So on the path to get there, the author could be like nullable and the ID could be non-nullable. So, then we have this like, a weird situation, I believe. Like, the movie can have an ID that is non-nullable, but the author can be nullable, right? The example that we had before, right? So then it's like the field itself is not nullable, but the path to get there might be, right?
Yeah, but that's fine, because you have the path. You have to think about, when you execute the graph, you get from somewhere, you get the author, and you know that this movie has an author with an ID. So it can be in the type syntax, in the type system, it can be non-null, but in fact that this ID will resolve.
Yeah,
because you know about it, right?
Yeah.
So what I would say, like, from the syntax side, and this chapter is about mainly syntax, this looks quite well. What we have to start on is the validation rules, but they should be co-located with the directives. as we already discerned that there might be slight differences in validation.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is definitely, combined with directives, there is validation rules. There's validation rules also in itself. For example, when you're allowed to use the path and when you're allowed to use whatever. But these validation rules we can just put in here. It's the validation rules of the syntax that it makes sense how it's done.
But then we have the validation of the mapping, and that's directive specific.
Yeah, the validation rules at the moment are very, very broad, like the ones in the graphical specification, because I checked them, and the graphical validation rules also just say that you are allowed to specify an input field in the input object if it's valid, more or less. If it exists, then you're allowed to specify it, and the type has to match. It's like that's the validation rule in the graphical specification, which makes sense. It's obvious. And that's also what we can do here. Right? So for every field in the select blah, blah, must be the name of the field and so on. It's basically a lot of copy paste from the graphical specification and then just changed it to work with the selected value object.
Yeah, there are a couple of validation rules we can take over, but there might be more complex ones.
Yeah, so I'm still unclear on the outcome of the nullability discussion on those and what sort of validations you want to enforce, because I do think that part is confusing when you have because for the requires and requiring nullable fields, that totally makes sense. For the keys, at least part of the key, in my opinion, should be not null, because otherwise it's
fine.
Yeah.
Look at this example.
Yeah, the key part too, I know this, but this is a kind of like one-off thing, right? So that would be
there could be the case where you have a key that is actually nullable. For example, you have the key part 1, which is let's say a nullable ID, and you have key part 2, which is also a nullable ID. But in your domain, it's guaranteed that you either have one or the other.
Yeah, but that would imply that the your keys on the object, because I'm still thinking about the relationship to the keys, right? So the relationship to the key is that one of those have to be non-null, right? So when you're mapping it, it's kind of like one-off, right? So you guarantee to have one or the other, right? Otherwise, you're gonna.
No, it could also be a composite, right?
Yeah, it could be two.
You guarantee there could be 2 sets, there could be 1 set, but there's at least 1 set.
Yeah.
And there's no way to express it other than with one-off, which would be fine, because you could say one-off, it's 1 key or it's 2 key, or it's key A, it's key B, or it's 2 keys. With one-off, this works. But from like a domain perspective of an evolving schema, it could be that you have introduced 2 kinds of IDs in some of the objects. I'm saying it's a rare case, but I don't think that we should enforce the validation rule.
And definitely not at this level. I think if we want to enforce that, it's a property of the key. And like if we want to make keys more restrictive, we can definitely talk about that, or like introduce like one-off syntax if that's like, it definitely gives us more guarantees. But I think that's separate from the lookup semantics. Lookup semantics, all they guarantee is that there's a correspondence between the argument and the object field, or like the mapped field.
So you could unify it, right? Then you would have this. That's what you mean, right?
Yeah, but we have no way of expressing that in GraphQL, really.
Yeah.
I mean, not in the current key syntax.
If you were to do 3 different lookups with those, then kind of, but there's also repercussions that depending on the order of the keys that you define, we notice that there's actually different behavior. And we generally we always pick the simplest one. So if you have the 2 keys, they will never be picked up because you can select one or the other. But it's
Yeah, I think that's a discussion about like the keys and key semantics. And I think there are even some ambiguities in how we query plan there with like nullable key fields. So that's definitely worth a discussion. But I don't think it affects lookup semantics.
Yeah.
Well, so it may if we move the is to the lookups. If we don't, then yeah, it doesn't.
Yeah, I think we agreed on a couple meetings ago that the key will just be defined on the object, and the lookup is just an annotation on a resolver that can look up based on the selections which are specified in the is. And there usually is a relationship, but doesn't have to be a relationship with the key. Is that correct? That's what I have in mind.
Yeah, and we even discussed cases where you can have sort of nested lookups, and together they map to a key. Like you have organization and repository, for instance, like, and they both have a name. And then on repository you have a key that is like the organization name and the repository name. So neither of the lookups has a direct relationship with that key, but at the point where you get to that object, you know that you have the key. You have all the information for the key.
Yeah, basically the combination of the two lookups defines also. Yeah, we have that in the current spec proposal.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's it. That's also it anyway, because we don't have any time left. I will comment what I have soon. Move the mention of the scope up, and then I think we can iterate on this. It feels like we're very close. If you do some thoughts experiment about this, it also feels very good. It seems to work.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I'm wondering.
Let's hope that we don't.
Oh,
go ahead.
Oh no, just wanted to say, David. I think this was another meeting where we sort of threw you in the deep end. And I mean, I'd love your take on some of these things, but you might be missing like some of the context, like where we use this and like what these directives do. So it would be great to get your take on like what we're talking about and how that maps to some of the things you have in mind.
Yeah, there's also next meeting, because I think we are almost through on that. We can go over the directives chapter, because
might be good to sort of recap that both for us and for David, so we can more productively participate.
But yeah, because if you look from the directive, this makes much more sense, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and like zooming out, I'm really interested in hearing more about sort of Hasura's take on this and how it relates to some of the things you're already doing. Like this is a particular understanding of federation, and I think it should also work with the use cases you're considering, but there might be very different like perspectives on some of this. I think you're muted, or no, you're not, but I can't hear you.
No.
No.
Ah. Yeah. Sounds good.
I anyway added David to the Slack channel, so he can also interact there as well, and then we can see where this is going.
Sounds good.
Yeah, we have 2 minutes left. I can ask a question.
Sure.
Like for example, if we have like keys, should there be exactly identical? I mean, non-nullable wise.
You mean in different subgraphs? You mean?
Yeah, like that's the case in Federation, but like
yeah,
I feel like it should be the case, but
It's definitely
Yeah,
the
we go
simpler
more-
case. Yeah, just sort of the
We-
more
we go-
restrictive. Yeah.
We start more into this topic when we start on the composition block. I think yeah. So let's get let's finish off the directives and this, and then we can start on the composition block, which will be a lot more.
Sure.
But then we can discuss really into the details of the rules, what merging means.
Yeah, I can definitely see a case for like evolving keys and different subgraphs having different understandings of those keys, but it's yeah, let's save that for later.
There's so much still. Okay.
Awesome.
Great time. See you next time, guys.
All right, see you next time.
Right.